Mother-in-law called the police on my wedding day, claiming someone stole her diamond necklace to ruin the event. She was caught and removed, then injured herself trying to re-enter. Hey everyone! So let me share the story of my so-entitled mother-in-law, Susan, who's 59. I'm 29 and married to my awesome husband, Andrew, who's 30. Let's rewind a few years to when Andrew and I first met. It was actually at the hospital where we both work. Yup, we're both in the healthcare biz. I'm a nurse, and he's a pediatrician. Now, I've got to tell you, it wasn't all smooth sailing from the start. Andrew and I had to navigate through some pretty choppy waters to make our relationship work. Dating a colleague isn't always easy, you know? There were those sneaky glances across hospital corridors, stolen conversations during lunch breaks, and trying our best not to get caught by our superiors. Let's just say we weren't exactly supposed to be fraternizing on the job, but hey, love finds a way, right? After 2 years of secretly dating, well, not so secret to our close friends, Andrew popped the big question. And boy, was I over the moon. Picture this: a romantic dinner at our favorite restaurant, candlelight flickering, soft music in the background, the whole shebang. Then, out of the blue, he gets down on one knee and pulls out the most beautiful ring I've ever seen. Of course, I said yes. Cue the happy tears and the flurry of phone calls to friends and family. Fast forward to the moving in phase. Let's just say it was a logistical puzzle trying to merge our two separate lives into one cozy abode. Boxes upon boxes of stuff to sort through, debates over whose IKEA furniture was better, and the inevitable discovery of each other's quirky habits, like Andrew's insistence on organizing his socks by color. Yes, really, but despite the occasional bump in the road, we managed to create a home that was uniquely a space filled with love, laughter, and the occasional friendly argument over whose turn it was to do the dishes. Now let's talk about Susan. Where do I even begin? Susan is what you might call a classic helicopter parent. She's got this knack for hovering over every aspect of Andrew's life, making sure everything's just so. And let me tell you, her grip on him is tighter than a vice. From the moment Andrew was born, Susan's been there, guiding his every move like a puppeteer pulling the strings. And Andrew, well, he's the epitome of the dutiful son, always eager to please his mama bear. Now don't get me wrong, I'm all for close-knit family relationships, but sometimes Susan's brand of love can feel a tad suffocating, especially when you're on the receiving end of her overbearing tendencies. She's got this uncanny knack for inserting herself into every decision Andrew makes, big or small. Whether it's what he wears, where he works, or even who he hangs out with, Susan's opinion is like gospel to him. And woe betide anyone who dares to challenge her authority. She's not one to back down without a fight. Then there's her habit of constantly second-guessing everything I do. It's like she's got this radar for detecting any deviation from her idea of perfection. Take, for example, our wedding planning escapades. You'd think it would be a joyous occasion, right? Wrong. Susan was like a bulldozer, and God forbid we didn't drop everything to cater to her every whim. Cue the guilt trips and passive-aggressive comments about how we never have time for family anymore. Perhaps the most frustrating thing about Susan's overbearing nature is the way it undermines Andrew's independence. It's like she can't fathom the idea of her baby boy growing up and making his own decisions. And while I get that she's coming from a place of love, it's hard not to feel like I'm constantly competing for Andrew's attention and approval. Susan definitely has a knack for being, well, less than charming. She's got this thing about me not being up to snuff for her precious son Andrew, and boy, does she make it known. Take this one time when we had her over for dinner. I busted my butt in the kitchen, cooking up a storm, only for Susan to take one bite and declare the chicken dry as a desert. Talk about a punch to the gut. Then there are her not-so-subtle digs about my career. Apparently, being a nurse just doesn't cut it in Susan's book. She's made more than a few snide remarks about how Andrew's job as a pediatrician somehow trumps mine. Real classy, right? And don't even get me started on her gift-giving skills or lack thereof. Instead of, asking me what I might like for my birthday, she decides to gift me a self-help book on how to impress your mother-in-law. Yeah, thanks, but no thanks, Susan. Susan's meddling ways extend far beyond just my relationship with Andrew. According to the grapevine, aka Andrew's relatives, Susan's been pulling this act with every girl he's ever brought home. And get this, apparently one of his exes even called it quits because of Susan's overbearing presence. But you know what? None of that really fazed me all that much. Sure, it's not exactly comforting to hear that your potential future mother-in-law has a track record of driving away significant others. But it's what it is. Susan had her day job, but with our jam-packed schedules, we hardly had any time to even think about her, let alone let her antics bother us. But all of that changed the moment I got engaged. Suddenly, I found myself dealing with her way more than I ever anticipated. And let me tell you, it wasn't exactly a breeze. From the start, Susan made it blatantly clear that she wanted a front row seat to everything wedding related. And I mean everything. We're talking dress fittings, venue scouting, menu tastings, you name it, she wanted in. At first, I tried to be diplomatic, altily including her in the decision-making process and nodding along as she gave her unsolicited opinions. But as the weeks went by, it became increasingly clear that Susan had no intention of taking a back seat. Take, for example, the dress dilemma. I had this vision of finding the perfect gown, one that made me feel like $1,000,000, and screamed, "Emily!" But Susan had other ideas. From insisting on tagging along to every bridal boutique in town, to vetoing dress after dress because they didn't meet her lofty standards, she made it clear that my dream dress was secondary to her vision of bridal perfection. And then there was the venue saga. Andrew and I had our hearts set on this quaint little barn nestled in the countryside, a place that felt like us. But Susan had her sights set on something a bit more upscale. Cue the endless debates, the passive-aggressive comments about how rustic wasn't exactly her idea of a dream wedding, and the inevitable compromise that left me feeling like Eid settled for second best. But perhaps the pièce de résistance of Susan's wedding planning takeover was her insistence on micromanaging every last detail. I'm talking flower arrangements, seating charts, and even the color scheme nothing was off limits. It got to the point where I started questioning whether this was even my wedding anymore, or just a production starring Susan, directed by Susan, and produced by Susan. And let's not even get started on the dreaded honeymoon discussion. I kid you not, I wouldn't put it past Susan to try and tag along on our romantic getaway. After all, she'd already made herself a permanent fixture in every other aspect of our wedding planning. Why stop now? Finally, the big day arrived, the day I'd been dreaming of since Andrew popped the question. Despite all the chaos leading up to it, I was buzzing with excitement to finally tie the knot with the love of my life. Nothing could dampen my spirits, not even Susan and her meddling ways. Or so I thought. Just when I believed we were in the clear, Susan swooped in with a bombshell that had me reeling. Picture this. I'm all dolled up in my bridal attire, nerves and anticipation running high, when Susan bursts into my room in a frenzy. And what does she have to say, you ask? Oh, just that her diamond necklace a diamond necklace had mysteriously gone missing. You can imagine the collective gasp that echoed through the room as we tried to wrap our heads around this sudden turn of events. Susan, her eyes wide with panic, insisted that someone had stolen it from her room. Cue the frantic search party, with Susan leading the charge like a woman possessed. But amidst the chaos, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't adding up. So, in a moment of pure desperation, I tentatively suggested to Susan that just maybe she'd misplaced the necklace. I mean, it happens to the best of us, right? Well, let's just say Susan wasn't exactly thrilled with my hypothesis. She shot me a dagger-like glare and practically spat out the words, "I'm not a forgetful person, Emily." And just like that, any hope of diffusing the situation with a bit of rational thinking went straight out the window. So there we were, me trying to reassure Susan that everything would be fine, while simultaneously battling the sinking feeling in my gut that this was only the beginning of a wedding day disaster. As my bridesmaids rallied around Susan, determined to track down the elusive necklace, I couldn't help but wonder if this was Susan's way of stealing the spotlight one last time before I walked down the aisle. Just minutes before I was set to walk down the aisle, a few policemen strolled into the venue looking all serious and dropped the bombshell that they'd received a call about a stolen diamond necklace. And guess who the culprit was? None other than my dear mother-in-law, Susan. I was floored, to say the least. I mean, who in their right mind calls the cops on their own son's wedding day? Talk about a major buzzkill. But there we were, thrust into the midst of a full-blown police investigation, all because Susan couldn't find her precious necklace. So I did what any bride-to-be in my shoes would do. I tried to defuse the situation as best as I could. I calmly explained to the officers that we were in the midst of searching for the necklace, and that we couldn't confirm whether it was actually stolen or just misplaced. And all the while, I couldn't help but think that this was just the universe's way of testing my patience one last time, before I finally got to say I do. So, it all started with a bit of misplaced drama. Susan wasn't about to let logic ruin her show. Meanwhile, my family, bless their hearts, swooped in to save the day. They backed me up, reassuring the officers that it was all just a big misunderstanding. I mean, what's a wedding without a little chaos, right? But despite their best efforts, you could cut the tension in the air with a knife. Guests were whispering, shooting suspicious glances towards Susan, and I felt like the world was on my shoulders. Seriously, who needs pre-wedding jitters when you've got a police interrogation? As the search for the missing diamond necklace dragged on, the tension was through the roof. Family members scoured every corner of the venue, their frantic whispers and hurried footsteps echoing everywhere. Meanwhile, my wedding, which was supposed to start on time, was now delayed by a whole hour. Frustration surged through me. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and instead, I was stuck playing detective in a real-life whodunit. I mean, who steals a necklace on someone's wedding day? Just when I was about ready to give up, in bounds, my 8-year-old nephew, grinning like he'd won the lottery, he proudly announced he'd found the necklace. My heart skipped a beat as I eagerly asked where he found it. Then he dropped the bombshell. He'd seen my mother-in-law, Susan, slip the necklace into her purse. My mind was reeling. Could it be true? Had Susan really stooped so low? Before I could fully wrap my head around it, my brother and mom came in, followed closely by Susan. With a sinking feeling, I mustered up the courage to confront her. "Did you find the necklace?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. To my shock, Susan shook her head, her face a mask of innocence. "No," she replied, calm and collected. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was my nephew mistaken? But as I glanced at Susan, my suspicions only grew. She'd been making a fuss about the necklace from the start, and now, with her denial, something didn't add up. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. All eyes were on Andrew as he purposefully strode over to his mom, determination etched on his face. In a move that shocked us all, he snatched the purse from her grasp and pulled out the missing necklace, holding it up for everyone to see. "Don't worry, folks, we found the necklace." But Andrew wasn't done. With the necklace dangling from his fingers, he turned to his mom and let her have it. He accused her of trying to steal the spotlight and ruin the wedding. Susan looked like a deer caught in headlights, stammering and protesting her innocence. But Andrew wasn't buying it, and neither were the rest of us. In a bold move, he called in security and had them escort Susan out of the venue. I'll never forget the look on Susan's face as she was led away, shock, disbelief, and maybe even a hint of shame. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed small and vulnerable, stripped of her usual bravado. As Andrew and I finally exchanged vows, I felt a bittersweet relief wash over me. The weight of Susan's presence had lifted, replaced by the overwhelming joy of starting our new life together. Sure, the ceremony was over an hour late, and we were all exhausted from the drama. But as we exchanged rings and sealed our love with a kiss, none of that mattered anymore. It didn't matter anymore because, at that moment, the only thing that mattered was Andrew and me, together at last, ready to take on whatever life threw our way. If the wedding day drama wasn't enough, things took a wild and unexpected turn during the reception. Just as we thought the chaos had finally died down, my mother-in-law Susan decided to up the ante in the most bizarre way possible. The reception was in full swing, guests were laughing, dancing, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. That is, until we heard a commotion coming from outside the venue. The staff filled us in on what happened, and we went to check it out. Turns out, my 59-year-old mother-in-law was trying to scale the wall of the venue, desperately trying to crash the party. And as if that wasn't crazy enough, she ended up injuring her leg in the process. Andrew and I were stunned and horrified by the sight of her, but, being the good son he is, Andrew rushed to Susan's side to check on her. She was screaming in pain, clutching her leg, with tears streaming down her face. The staff quickly called an ambulance to get her some help. Now, here's where it got tricky. When the paramedics arrived, they checked her out and said it was just a minor sprain, nothing serious that needed a hospital trip. But Susan, being the drama queen she is, insisted it was way more serious and that she was in excruciating pain, demanding immediate medical attention. Andrew and I were torn. Part of us wanted to help, but we were also like, haven't we dealt with enough drama for one day? In the end, we decided to play it safe. Andrew asked his friend to take Susan to the hospital, which she was none too happy about. She yelled, demanding to know why Andrew himself wasn't going with her. But Andrew stood firm, explaining that we needed to get back to the reception and reassured her that she'd be in good hands. So, we headed back to the party, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe we'd been too harsh. Sure, Susan's behavior had been out of line, But was booting her from the wedding and sending her off to the hospital really the right move? Shouldn't we have shown her more compassion, even with her outrageous antics? Anyway, here's an update. After our crazy wedding day, Andrew and Susan had a big showdown when she got dropped off at her house, instead of coming back to the reception. Needless to say, she wasn't thrilled, but at least it put an end to her wedding-crashing antics, or so we thought. The next day, Andrew and I went back to our apartment, thinking the drama was behind us. But guess who was waiting for us outside? Yep, Susan. She didn't look too happy to see us. Before we could even say hello, Andrew was like, "Not now, Mom. I'm really tired." But instead of backing off, Susan got all passive-aggressive, basically saying he didn't have time for his own mother. And bam, another round of Susan's never-ending drama. We managed to get inside, hoping for a moment's peace, but she kept going on and on. I tried hinting it wasn't the best time for a heart-to-heart, but she ignored me. Then, things hit a boiling point. Andrew exploded, letting out all his pent-up frustration. "If you loved me so much, Mom, then why did you try to ruin my wedding?" he shouted. "You knew damn well Emily bent over backward to make you happy, but it was never enough for you." Andrew's words cut deep, and the truth came spilling out, raw and unfiltered. Susan refused to own up to her actions, making excuses about how a necklace ended up in her purse, or maybe she just forgot about things. And, of course, she started crying, as if that would erase everything. But Andrew wasn't buying it. Andrew looked Susan straight in the eye, and man, he was seriously disappointed in her behavior. He made it crystal clear that if she wanted him to move past this betrayal, it was going to take a ton of time and effort. Eventually, Andrew hit his limit. With a heavy heart, he asked Susan to leave. At first, she stubbornly refused, but once she realized neither Andrew nor I were budging, she finally left, throwing us one last nasty look and saying we'd regret it. So, it's been a while since my last update, and let me tell you, it's been eerily quiet on the Susan front. After Andrew and I kicked her out, I expected her to blow up our phones or just show up unannounced at our place. But nope, not a peep. Seriously, talk about a plot twist, right? We were starting to get a bit worried. I mean, love her or hate her, Susan was never one to shy away from drama, so her sudden radio silence was super weird. But just when we thought the drama was over, guess who decided to make a grand entrance? Yep, Susan. And she had some huge news. Apparently, after everything that went down, she had an epiphany or something. She waltzes into our house like she owns the place and announces she's moving to an assisted living facility. I was completely floored. This is the same woman who once tried to crash our wedding by scaling a wall, and now she's talking about assisted living? Talk about a 180 turn. Andrew, bless his heart, tried to talk some sense into her. He's like, "Mom, you don't have to do this. We can figure something out." But Susan being Susan, she insisted it was the best thing for her. She rambled on about how she'd have company and wouldn't be alone, yada yada. Then she drops the bomb that she's already leased out her house and moving out this weekend. I was reeling. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under us. Andrew, being the stand-up guy he is, offered to drive her himself. But Susan, of course, played the guilt card, saying she didn't want to be a burden or whatever. Classic Susan move, right? After she left, Andrew and I had a heart-to-heart. He admitted he didn't quite buy Susan's whole story. So, putting on my detective hat, I reached out to a friend of Susan's who's a realtor. And wouldn't you know it, she confirmed, Susan was serious about this move. We were feeling all sorts of emotions, sadness, confusion, maybe even a hint of relief. We didn't want Susan out of our lives completely, but after everything, maybe some distance wasn't the worst idea. Still, it was hard not to feel guilty, knowing it had come to this. She's family, after all. Seeing her go through this was tough, but we knew we had to respect her decision, no matter how hard it was to accept. Update 3. Andrew and I psyched ourselves up for what we thought would be a smooth transition for Susan to the assisted living facility. We were ready to make the best of a not-so-great situation, and maybe even get some quality family time in. But wow, things went off the rails. As we got in the car, Andrew and I tried to keep the mood light, cracking jokes and singing along to the radio, anything to distract from the awkwardness. But Susan, bless her heart, was quiet as a mouse. When we finally pulled up to the facility, the tension was thick. We exchanged nervous glances as we walked through the doors, bracing ourselves. But here's the kicker. When we got to the reception desk to check Susan in, we were met with blank stares. There was no booking in Susan's namezip, zilch, nada. Susan was adamant she'd made the booking and that the guy on the phone confirmed everything. Turns out, there had been a massive miscommunication. The guy had only confirmed a visit, not a booking. Andrew, trying his best to stay calm, gently grilled Susan on how she could have made such a colossal mistake. So, Susan being Susan, started to fall apart right in front of us. Tears were streaming down as she confessed she had no clue what to do next. She'd already rented out her apartment, thinking everything was good to go. But now she was hit with the cold, hard truth that nothing was going according to plan. I shot a look at Andrew and could see his brain working overtime. Without even saying a word, we knew what each other was thinking. When he gave me that "let's do this" look, I nodded in agreement. Then, out of nowhere, Andrew offered Susan a lifeline. She could crash at our place until we figured something out. So, yep, we took her home with us. Honestly, I have no idea how long she's gonna stick around, but I'm crossing my fingers for minimal drama. Update 4. Hey everyone, this is my final update, so get ready. Living with Susan was, well, exactly what you'd expect, and then some. Andrew and I were just getting started as newlyweds, and having Susan around was seriously cramping our style. We had a honeymoon coming up in just 2 weeks, and the last thing I wanted was to come back to her still hogging our living room. So I came up with a plan. I have this friend who travels a lot for work, and guess what? Her job was sending her to another state for a couple of months, meaning her apartment would be totally empty. Perfect timing, right? I reached out and explained the situation, and she was totally cool with helping out. She got it. Who wouldn't want to help a friend in need? I pitched the idea to Andrew, and he was all in. It made total sense. By the time my friend got back from her trip, Susan's lease would be up, and we'd be off the hook. Getting Susan on board was another story, though. She was hesitant at first, worried about imposing on a stranger's space. But I assured her the place was nearby, and she could visit us whenever she wanted. After a bit of convincing, she finally agreed to give it a try. So we packed up Susan's stuff and moved her into my friend's place. It was a bit of a hassle, sure, but nothing compared to the relief we felt knowing this chapter was closing. For now, at least, the Susan saga is over. And let me tell you, it feels like a massive weight has been lifted. There's still some uncertainty looming, but for now, we're just enjoying the peace and quiet of a Susan-free life.